Hi friends! This is my second take because apparently I was chatting for 10 minutes without realizing I wasn't filming. So, hi, my name is Heidi. You can find me on Ravelry and Instagram at Books and Cables. And usually I would put up a little bit of a knitting vlog showing you my progress through the week, but since this week I was really bad at actually filming any footage, and actually the footage I filmed I wasn't super happy with. I didn't feel like I expressed myself particularly well in them, so I thought it would be easier to just sit down and do a shorter video where I talk to you for a little bit. So I hope that's okay. I do have a really exciting project that I will be sharing with you where I'm going to talk through some different color work techniques. So that will be coming up later, and I'm also going to mention where I'm going to be tomorrow, which is also very exciting. So this week I mainly worked on 2 whips, one of which you've already seen before, which I'll show you first because I don't really have very much to say about it. The second one is very exciting. So the first is the Finch Sweater. I showed it to you a few weeks ago when I had just maybe got to the 3, when I was doing the 3 color section, which is this first one, and maybe I've showed you this, but since then I've gotten up to 2 further charts, and I actually brought this with me both times I went to Wabi Sabi on Friday and Sunday because of all of their, they had 2 knit nights basically, or 1 knit night, 1 knit afternoon, as part of their 10th anniversary celebration. You would have seen some footage from the Friday night, but I went back again on Sunday when they were just having a nice like Canadian Thanksgiving afternoon, get away from the family. So that was really super, and I brought this to knit on because although it does have that 1 2-color section, the rest of it are fairly simple repeats that you just, it's really easy to memorize. You only have to do it maybe once or twice, and then you do it for the rest of the 500 stitches in the round. The only thing is, because the rounds are so long, sometimes I get messed up on where the round started. So I've had a few times where I started a new color in the middle, in the side seam, and not at the beginning. So both the beginning of the round, so the beginning of the round is on the right side, and then there's a marker for the other side because it's originally written to be knitted as 2 flat pieces, so I've just combined them together. And I've accidentally started a new round on the seam that's not the beginning of round, and I knitted all the way to the beginning of round, and I remembered, oh yeah, that's why I put a different looking marker here, and it's not even, it's a sheep on the beginning of the round and just a black marker on the other one. So I don't know how I made mistakes, but that was super great to have to tank back 200 stitches in public. So yeah, I love that. So that's, I don't really have much more to update on that. It's gonna be pretty, not boring, but just continuing to do the repeats of the pattern until I get to the shoulder. That's when I'm gonna maybe talk about it again next, other than just mentioning that I'm continuing to work on it, because that's when I'm going to be adding the steek stitches for the shoulder and starting to do the increases for the, it's a very light increase because it's not a set-in sleeve, it's just a drop shoulder, but there is a little bit of a shaping there after you basically separate for the, so you like cast off 1 stitch basically where the armhole will start, and then you cast on 5 steek stitches to replace it, and that way you continue knitting around. So that will be probably what I'll show you whenever I get there, but for now, yeah, it's just business as usual on that one. So now the sweater that I really want to talk to you about. So last week, as I mentioned, Wabi Sabi, they had their 10th anniversary sale, so part of that was 10% off, and I was already very bad, and you saw me having bought the mohair for the ranunculus sweater, but of course I made the mistake of going again on Sunday, and so these enablers, when I showed them the colors I was thinking of for this sweater pattern that I'm obsessed with, and I've talked to you about it pretty much every episode since I've started doing this, it's the Ixchel. So I was talking to the ladies at Wabi Sabi about the colors I was thinking of doing for it, because I saw that, is it Valkyrie Fiber? She had done a, basically a black and white version, or a black and light gray version, and I thought that was really spectacular. And this pattern, I just can't get it out of my head, so it's one of those things where I knew I needed to start it in order to get it out of my system so I could kind of shut up about it. And I also recently listened to the designer, who is Catherine Clark from the Brooklyn General Store, which is a local yarn store in New York City. She did an interview with Christy Glass Knits where she talks about sort of the inspiration behind this design, and she was talking about how her inspiration around it is she wanted a design which made women feel powerful, and she was mentioning that the first time she put it on after she finished knitting it, she kind of felt like a superhero, and so she was really excited to share this in order to allow other women to feel that way. And I thought that was a brilliant concept and a brilliant product as well. And I'm gonna flip through because I think it'll actually tell me how to say it properly. Yeah, Ixchel. I've been saying Ixchel, or Ixchel. That's usually where I'm like Ixchel. Yeah, so Ixchel, and it's named after a Mayan jaguar goddess of rainbows and childbirth, and which is super interesting because the designer, Catherine Clark, she's also a midwife. So not only is she a local yarn store owner, she's also a midwife. And yeah, I really recommend both the interview with her talking about this design and the original interview Christy Glass did with her about Brooklyn General Store, because it's super interesting and she's such a neat lady. Anyway, I'm gonna put that aside so I don't keep flipping through it. I will say this sweater is not for the faint of heart. It's not difficult in the sense that the color work you're doing is all just 2 colors, and the charts are sort of repeats of only two or 3 stitches most of the time. The part that's difficult about it is that the way it's designed, it has a center panel which has a fixed design, and that's this arrow with the moons in it, and that stays the same the whole time. So you kind of put 2 stitches around it, and you work that separately from all of the increases that happen around it. And then all of these little stars are not one big chart, but they're all small repeats of little charts, and then between which you do all of the increases. And then, so for example, you see this, each of those little cross lines, that represents one chart that you would do, like a repeat of however many you need to get around the arms. So where was I going with this? The reason why there's some trickiness is that sometimes there's a black row. So when I say black, it's because it's the colors that I picked. The blank row, there will be sections where you do only the center panel, but the rest of the round is just the background color. So basically you do a combination of stranded knitting when you have a full row of motifs, but occasionally you have to do a bit of intarsia in order to continue this pattern all the way through. The other the other part that involves a little bit of thinking is that this section with all of the phases of the moons has just background stocking net for the arms, and then this motif appears just in the middle and as well on the middle of the back. So that needed some thinking about in terms of how I wanted to achieve it. And also because these moons, they do get quite wide, and that means you end up carrying the background color across, let's say, I don't remember, more than 10 stitches. And when you're doing that for, because there's a big kind of section where you do the color work for the same amount of rows. Basically what you end up with if you just knit it stranded is the moon will kind of sink into the work, even if you do the color dominance thing where you knit the contrast color on your left hand, you still kind of end up with the moon sinking in, because usually for color work you don't do very many rows where you have it a straight line like this, whereas for intarsia you do. So very long story short, very long. I guess it's not short at all. Long story long, I decided to try some new intarsia techniques that I've been learning about in order to make this sweater the most beautiful as I can make it. And I can't believe I made it all the way to now without actually picking up the sweater in question. So I will talk you through some of the decision, because I did change the way I was approaching it as I was doing it, as I thought of different things. So first things first, the colors that I chose. So these are the colors that I chose. This is Cast Iron in Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and this is actually one of the new Brooklyn Tweed Loft colors, which is Pumice. And I didn't realize it was the new color when I bought it, but I think the icy blue that they just came out with caught my attention more, and this is just sort of a shade of gray in between two shades, so I was just like, that's the shade of gray, that felt right, and so I didn't realize it was actually one of the exciting new colors that they just came out with. But this is my favorite yarn at the moment because it's just so light. So they're not cheap. I think they're $20.50 each in Canadian dollars. However, the yardage you get with it is fantastic because of how light it is. So this is 275 yards for, I'm guessing, a 50-gram skein. Just to give you an idea in comparison, usually for like woolen spun, like I just saw one recently, it was $30 for 178 yards. So you're getting, in the equivalent amount size skein, you're getting 275 yards for less money. So although it's not cheap, because of I think my computer just started the fan. Sorry if you can hear that. Although it's not cheap, I'm getting distracted by it because it's also flashing different colors. Although it's not cheap, you get good yardage with it. It is woolen spun, so it's my favorite, and I prefer using that for color work because of the way it fills in the gaps when you block it. It really blooms up and becomes a cohesive piece. I've talked about this before, but the reason why I thought that was particularly important, rather than use the original yarn that she used, which is this gorgeous sort of tealy blue color, and then this very variegated yellow gold color, which makes it look like the different what are those things, the textures that you get on the moon. Rather than choosing to use that color, both one, because I would have had to purchase it in American dollars, which made the sweater significantly more expensive, and I'm likely would have had to pay customs on it or taxes on it. So the other part I didn't really like about it is because it was the superwash, although it's cashmere merino, so it would have bloomed a little bit, but it just, from the pictures I was seeing of it, I just didn't like the way those the fabric looked, because especially with the center panel where there's one straight line, they were really looking very wobbly and not quite staying cohesive. Although blocking did help a lot of those, it wasn't the effect that I wanted to achieve. So decided to go with the woolen spun and with my favorite sort of workhorse yarn.
If you're a YouTuber, you're probably using this.
Okay.
And this.
I'm just gonna
so you
pause
should
this.
start using.
Okay, so funny story about that. That's not the first time this damn computer's done this. So it's whenever I leave YouTube open and I just close the screen, sometimes it comes to life by itself, and this happened. So I mentioned I had been having a hard time sleeping. So a few days ago, I like couldn't really get to sleep, and it was 3 in the morning, and I finally was almost asleep. And then I heard from outside of my room that woman speaking, and I was like, the devil is in this house. So I came out, and it turned out it was just a YouTube video playing, but it took me another hour before I could get anywhere close to sleep. So I need to apparently not leave YouTube open while I'm going to bed. Don't remember what I was talking about. I still haven't showed you the sweater. I'm sorry, I'm the worst. So this is what it looks like right now. You would have seen a picture of it probably if you follow me on Instagram, because I was really rushing this whole week to get to the arm and shoulder divide. So I started it on Sunday right after I purchased the yarn, and honestly, this pattern has flown by. It is very complicated and involves a lot of concentration, but because there's always something to do, I found it really easy to just do, like, it's like potato chippy, like just another round, and so I made it to the arm fairly quickly, considering the amount of different techniques I ended up choosing to do with it. So I don't remember where I am in my talking to you. I've just been chatting. So anyway, you can see I feel like already I like the way that this is looking a lot more than some of the progress pictures I've seen where the arrows are a little bit wobbly. Again, like I said, it's fine. The yarn choice, if you make it understanding what it's gonna do, that's perfect. I chose to go with a yarn that I know works really well with color work. But to also just ensure that these lines stayed straight, I did do a little bit more intarsia techniques just to make sure. Basically, whenever I reached the line here, instead of just picking up the other color and knitting it, what I did was an intarsia technique where you basically lock the stitches. It sounds like it's a special technique. Basically, you just twist the stitches around each other so that they end up sort of being tight together, rather than sort of, if you don't do it, I guess the alternative if you don't do it is basically there's going to be a stitch hanging there which is not sticking to the work, so it ends up falling behind, and so it kind of sinks into the fabric. So if you lock the stitches, you kind of put them on the same, it's almost like if you had tied it together in a knot, and then so it kind of put them on the same plane. I don't know how to describe, but yeah, and rather than it's not this strand because it's behind the work and not sticking to anything, it would fall that way. But if you lock it, it just sticks together like this. And so that makes a really clean line. And I did that for the moons as well, so that it wouldn't fall in. So yeah, that's and originally the pattern tells you when you get to a row with all black, except for the center panel, you should knit through the panel, break the second color, and then continue in your background color, attach the second color again in your next round, and then so you would end up with a lot of ends. And I decided I don't want to have to weave in a lot of stuff at the end, so basically I did the intarsia thing where you leave a strand just hanging on a bobbin, and usually you knit intarsia flat back and forth because of the way you carry the colors. Like if you only have one section with a circle, if you knit it flat, you would knit across, pick up your second color, and knit to the other side of the circle. Going backwards, you already have the strand on this side, so you just knit it across. If you're going in the round, however, you knit across, and then the strand is on this side, but then you come back around and you need the strand on this side. So it is a little bit messy, but I just pulled it across and then twisted the stitch so that very loosely so that it wouldn't pucker. So I twisted the stitch. So basically I caught the stitch, you know, like you would across a very long strand, you just catch it. So twist it around each other so that it would catch, and I did that very loosely so then it hung across. It does look a little bit messy, but it's the other side, no one's gonna see it. And that saved a significant amount of time, so I will continue to do that for the center panel. The other thing I will mention is there are sections where you have to carry the strands across a long distance. Let's say, I don't know, like 15 or 10 stitches. And usually I would catch about every inch, which I think is about every 6 stitches. So 6 or 7, 6 or 7. Anyway, rather than doing that, rather than catching the strands, because I noticed that it was kind of poking through, and because of the how high the contrast is between the gray and the black, it was poking through and looking a little bit ugly. So I decided to just leave it very loose across the back. The only bad part about that is perhaps you would get your fingers caught in it, or it might get pulled at some point. But I was watching something, an interview, probably a podcast, where they were talking about how catching the strands, not only does it show through on the other side, but it really compromises the flexibility of the fabric. It makes it really tight, because your strands, rather than hanging loosely and having a little bit of stretch, it's being caught. So the amount of string that's there to allow the fabric to stretch is now tight, is now knitted into it, so you have less space for the fabric to stretch out. And I think it was another Christy Glass interview, and they were mentioning that Caitlin Hunter, in her patterns, she doesn't recommend that you catch the yarn, because all of her projects are about looseness and flexibility, and so by catching it you kind of constrict the fabric, and that's not really the effect that she's going for. So in thinking about that, and knowing that the size that I chose has maybe only a 1 to 2 inch ease, which is a lot less than I usually choose, but I thought this, because of the amount of the decoration on it, and it's in a way that's different than Farrell to me, like a full body Farrell sweater. For some reason, this to me is a lot flashier than that. I thought it would look really wonky and not actually display the motifs as well if I wore it really oversized. So I chose the size which was only with 1 inch ease, and I thought it's already tighter, so I didn't want the fabric to be tighter than it was already tight. Anyway, so I left it, and that also eliminated the problem of it, the color showing through on the other side as well. Excuse me. Although I did start with the catching for the first couple rounds, but it also slowed me down a lot if I had to catch so often. So I decided to continue with that. So I decided not to continue with doing that, and that made the rest of this a lot faster, because then I could just sort of strand it loosely and then continue, instead of having to knit, catch, knit, catch, sort of thing. The thing is, though, when I got to this moon panel part, I could choose to either do it in intarsia, but then I would have to like pull the threads all the way across the back, or choose to break and reattach every time. And I thought that was gonna take forever, or some people have done this in duplicate stitch as well, just to save time, but I found out about Susan Rainey's invisible stranding technique, and I've been hearing a lot of stuff about ladder back jacquard. So I decided to look into that because of the significant section of black around these moons. So I had seen this pattern that Susan Rainey had designed called It's Not About the Hat. And that's kind of her sort of usual design is she'll come up with a technique or develop an existing technique into a more effective way, and she'll develop a pattern around it to showcase that technique, and then she'll call it something like It's Not About the Hat, it's about invisible stranding, and that's the pattern that I bought from her. I can't tell you very much about how to actually do it since it is a proprietary pattern, so I will just leave a link below so you can go and purchase the pattern and see her method that she's developed. But essentially you get this, you carry the yarn all the way across, but you catch it all like this so that it's really neat. And it's basically, you make a second layer of fabric which is not attached to the first, so it doesn't cause any sort of puckering on the other side. It does look like it's gonna pucker while you're knitting it, but it goes away. It looks really neat. You can't even tell that I carried it, and it made the moon section extremely fast. And I really recommend that pattern and all of Susan Rainey's brilliant technique that she shares, if you're interested in checking that out. Yeah. What else do I have to say about that? That's pretty much it. I wanted to share with you the way that I decided to do it because I know a lot of people are looking at this pattern and they're feeling intimidated by the sheer number of color work that it involves, and the fact that the charts are not one large motif but lots of little ones broken up. What I found really useful is I essentially put stitch markers in between every repeat. So it'll say like, do this chart for X amount of times across the body. So I even though it took like 20 stitch markers, I literally put one across every single repeat just to make it easier. It's the same thing I do for lace, just because keeping track of it, counting just takes a lot. For a pattern that already takes so much concentration, adding that additional counting layer just doesn't seem like it's worth it. And I think that's all I have to say about that. I'm just racking my brain to think if I have anything else to say. That's pretty much my week in knitting, and I'm really excited to be able to wear it. Now I'm going to talk to you about where I'm going tomorrow. So on Thursday, which is yesterday, pretty much, basically, or Wednesday, yeah. Very spur of the moment, I just thought I gotta get out of Ottawa. It happens sometimes. I do like living in Ottawa, but it's just not quite the same as living in a big city like where I grew up in Vancouver, which is not even nearly as big as Montreal or Toronto, but just Ottawa is a small city. And because a lot of people here are in the government, it does feel like you're in a bubble, which is kind of different. A lot of people talk about the Ottawa bubble, about how it feels like you're insulated and it... Hi. So my camera cut me off right as I was complaining about Ottawa, typical. But what I was trying to tell you was that I wanted to get out of Ottawa just for the day. So tomorrow I'm going to be taking a very glamorous Greyhound bus over to Montreal and meeting up with some knitters there. So the plan is in the morning, I'm going to La Societe Textile to meet my friend Marina and one of her friends. And I'll get to see the lovely owner there, Emily, again. That'll be a lot of fun. And then for the afternoon, I'm planning on heading over to La Maison Tricoté and then meeting Catherine and Freddie. And we're going to do some shopping and then head over to a pub and have some food, some bevies, and then knit for the afternoon. So if you happen to be in Montreal and you want to join us, send me a message at Books and Cables on Instagram and I can give you the details. I'm going to do it that way so I can screen the people I give that information to for internet safety reasons, I suppose. Although I've told you pretty much my whole plan, so I'm not exactly very careful about that. I kept saying to myself, don't be weird, but I am a little bit irritated I have to refilm this. So, yeah, I am being weird, sorry. That's pretty much it. If you want to find me, Heidi, you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram, like I just mentioned, at Books and Cables. And thank you for joining me for this, what turned out to be a long video, where I just chatted about my 2 whips for the week. And I hope to see you next time. I always forget to do this, but I would appreciate it if you click that subscribe button to let... Apparently it helps. I don't know. But I'm mostly on Instagram, so you can always just find me there if you wanted to chat. Okay, bye!